All right, guys, tomorrow your quiz is on factoring only. Okay, it's P4, A, B, C, and D. So grouping, trinomials, difference of perfect squares, sum and difference of perfect cubes. All of the type of factoring that we've done. There's going to be some questions that have several things in it, like you have to take the GCF out, then difference of squares. So make sure you are asking yourself at every step, have I completely factored? It's 14 questions. Okay, it's 14 questions. Yeah. I'm going to give you back your test after I go over this. There's 2 questions on your test that had to do with factoring. The rest of it were all like the other concepts. That stuff from your next test, guys, look, it's up here. Somebody asked me last period, how am I supposed to know? It's on Canvas. It's been on Canvas. It's written right here. You guys have a quiz tomorrow, and then your next test, P2 to P5. So all the stuff that we've been doing, and then we're going to pull in the next rational stuff is going to be on September 17th. So just so you have a heads up, okay? Just be aware of what we're doing. When we factor completely, yes, you guys are going to get partial credit. If you just take out the GCF but don't finish, then, maybe 2 points, maybe 4 points, depending upon the question. But what is the first thing we look for every single time? GCF, okay? GCF first, every single time. GCF first, every single time. So I look at the first one here. I didn't number them, just put dots. Okay, we look for a GCF. Is there a letter and or a number that I can take out of both of these terms? No. But what do you notice about this problem? It is perfect square, but what do you notice about the problem? It leads with a negative. If you lead with a negative, you have to take it out because right now, this is not the difference of perfect squares. Difference means there's a minus sign in between the 2 terms. Take out the negative 1. Once you take out the negative 1, you have 25x to the 4th minus 16y to the 8th. Now, some of you are going to say, I could just do it. I could just go negative 5x squared. I get that. I want you to get in the habit of taking the negative out first. Yes, sir.
Can't you just switch the 16 and the 25?
You can. I would like you to get in the habit, though, of taking the negative out first. You're going to need that when we get to later stuff. Yes, right now you can switch because they happen to both be perfect squares. It's not a GCF, whatever. But just try to get in the habit of doing that. Once we take out that negative, we look and we say, are these 2 perfect squares? Is 25x to the 4th a perfect square? Yes. What is it? 5x squared and 5x squared. What about 16y to the 8th? 4y to the 4th. 4y to the 4th. So what do my 2 parentheses look like? Well, I have my negative 1 out in front. Both of my parentheses have a 5x squared at the beginning. And what at the end? 4y to the 4th. And then what are the signs in the middle? One's a plus, one's a minus. Does it matter where the plus goes, where the minus goes? No. Now, when you get to this, guys, you need to say, okay, did I factor everything? Can I do anything with this? No, they're not perfect squares, and it's a plus sign, so you got to leave it. Look at the second one. It's the difference, but are both terms in the parenthesis a perfect square? No. If they were, then yes, you could break that down again, but it's not, so you are done. But you've got to check every single time. You guys have questions, comments? All right, look at the next one.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What happens if it would be negative 25x4 minus 16y to the 8th?
Okay, so if you had negative 25x to the 4th minus 16y to the 8th, like that. Okay, take out the GCF, so negative 1. So you have 25x to the 4th plus 16y to the 8th, and then there'd be nothing else you could do. Good question. Okay, first thing we look for, GCF. Is there one? No. How many terms do I have? 3. I'm going to go ahead and just check in my mind, see if this is a perfect square trinomial. Is 9m squared a perfect square? Yeah, 3m and 3m, right? Is negative 50 a positive perfect square? No. So this is not a perfect square trinomial. We just have to go ahead and say, all right, A times C. Notice, guys, there's M's and there's N's. That means you're going to have an M at the front of your parenthesis and an N at the back. So I'm going to go ahead and write out my parentheses. I'll do it both ways, my way and the grouping way. But 9 times negative 50 is negative 450. What are the factors of negative 450 that multiply to give me negative 450 but add to give me negative 15? Negative 30, positive 15. So I'm going to put my M here, my N here, and then I'm just going to put minus 30 there and plus 15 there. Now again, this is the way that I do it. If you don't like it, you like the grouping method, I'll do it in a second. But what do I have to do with my 9? Since my leading coefficient is not a 1, what do I have to do with that 9? Perfect. Divide both of them by 9. Does 30 divide evenly by 9? No. Does 15 divide evenly by 9? No. But do they simplify? Yeah. 3 goes into both of them, right? So this is 30n over 3. And this is what?
15.
What's 15 divided by 3?
5.
What's 9 divided by 3? So that simplifies. Now, do we leave our answer like that? No. What do we do with this 3? Goes there. What do I do with this 3? Goes.
Yeah. 15.
It should be 10. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Now what? God bless. What happens? What are my 2 parentheses? 3m minus 10n and 3m plus 5n. Let's do it the grouping way. If you prefer the grouping way, that's totally fine with me. I do not mind. Whatever works. So how do we do the grouping way? Well, we write our first term, 9m squared. Then we write our 2 factors. So minus 30mn, a positive 15mn. Then you write the last term. So minus 50n squared. And we group with 4 terms. What do I take out of, what do we have in common with 9m squared and 30mn? 3m. What am I left with? Perfect. What can I take out of 15mn and negative 50n squared? 5. What am I taking out? N. Okay, and what am I left with? 3m minus 10n. Okay, good. Do we notice that these now are both the same? So that's my new GCF. I'm going to bring it out in front. And then what happens with my leftovers? They get their own parentheses, right? So 3m plus 5n. Did we get the exact same thing? Yeah, both ways. Now, how do I know before I turn my quiz in that my answers are all right? How do I know, guys? When I turn my quiz in and I say, oh, okay, I know I got 100. How do you know? Foil it. Foil it back out, and you should end up with what you started with. Okay, let's look at something like this. GCF. GCF, guys. No, okay. Nothing's going to go into all 3 of those. How many terms do you have? 3. Let's check to see if it's a perfect square trinomial. 9x squared, perfect square? 3x. Okay, 3x and 3x. 16, positive? Yes. Perfect square? Yes. Okay. How do we know for sure if this is a perfect square trinomial? Multiply. What's 3x times 4 times 2? 24. Is this 24x? No. Guys, don't just fall for, oh, the first one's a perfect square, the last one's positive, it's a perfect square, and then just throw it into a squared binomial. Don't do that. Check to make sure. So we know, like, oh, okay, it's not a perfect square trinomial. So how do I go about doing this? I multiply a times what? C. What's 9 times 16? 144, okay? I need factors of 144 that are going to multiply to give me 144. But when I add them, I get negative 26. Eight and 18. Good. What are the signs on both 8 and 18? Both negative. Because when I add those together, I get a negative 26. When I multiply them, I get positive 144. So again, we'll do it both ways. We'll do it my way and the grouping way. So I just have x's. That's fine. I have a minus 18 and a minus 8. Since my a term is not 1, what do I do with it? Divide. So I have 18 divided by 9. So x minus 2. And then does 8 divide by 9 pretty? No, so 9 becomes your coefficient. 9x minus 8. If you did it the grouping way, I'll do it out here. You start off with your first term, 9x squared. Then we had negative 18 with an x, a negative 8 with an x, and your last term, which is 16. Group the first two, group the second two. What can I take out of 9x squared and negative 18x? 9x, good. And I'm left with x minus 2. What can I take out of negative 8x and a 16? Negative 8. And I'm left with x minus 2. So there's my new GCF, x minus 2. And my leftovers get their own parentheses, so 9x minus 8. Either way, same thing. And again, you can foil your answer out to check to see, oh good, when I multiply it together, I get my original expression.
Why wasn't it a perfect square trinomial?
Okay, good question. A perfect square trinomial, you multiply the first term, which is 3x times 4, is what? 12, and then times that by 2.
24.
In order for this to be a perfect square trinomial, that middle term needed to be 24x, not 26. Good question. But just don't get fooled by that. Again, you have something like this, guys. What would my suggestion be the first thing to do? To rewrite it. When I rewrite it, this becomes x squared positive minus 18x plus 80, correct? All right, go through the steps. Is there a GCF? No. 3 terms. Trinomial. Is this a perfect square trinomial? Where x squared is a perfect square is 80? No, so you just multiply a times c. 1 times 80 is 80. What are the factors of 80 that multiply to give me 80, but add to give me a negative 18? Say it again. Negative 10, negative 8. So x goes in the front of each parenthesis. I have minus 10, minus 8. That's it. I don't have to divide by anything. I don't have to do any grouping or anything like that because the a term, the number in front of x squared, is 1. Questions? We okay? Scoot along. Yeah. Okay, let's look at these 3. GCF. No. Huh. So what do I do? What am I thinking? How many terms are there? There's 2 terms. So what could this possibly be? Difference of squares because there's a minus sign? Or difference of cubes? Is this the difference of squares or difference of cubes? Cubes. Now we got to figure out, okay, what times what times what's going to give me 216? Four times 4 is 64. What's 5 times 5 times 5? 125. What's 6 times 6 times 6? 216. So this is 6x to the what? Second. My b term, we just did it. What times what times what? Because you 125. 5. Okay, so guys, once you determine what the a and the b are, or if you use a u and a v, the rest of this should be pretty simple. What does my first parenthesis say? Because you need squared. What times what times what would give you x to the 6th? X squared times x squared times x squared gives you x to the 6th. Because you have the same base, and you add the exponents, that would give you x to the 6th. So I have 6x minus 5y. Why did you guys choose the minus sign? Because of the minus sign. Perfect. So how do we get the next part? I square my a term. Guys, remember, when you square this a term, that 2 is going to the 6 and to the x. So what does that become? 36x to the 4th. Perfect. How do you get that next sign? It's the opposite of what the initial one is. Good. And then how do I get my middle term? You're going to multiply a times b. So what do you get? 30x squared y. Perfect. And then how do I get my last term? You square the b. It's always going to be positive because you're squaring, so it's plus. Remember, it goes both places. So I have 25y squared. Now, somebody asked a wonderful question last period. Do you just leave it like that? Do you just leave it? Can this be broken down anymore? It appears to be a perfect square trinomial. You need to always ask yourself the question. Think about it. Is 36x to the fourth a perfect square? 6x squared and 6x squared, right? Is 25y squared a perfect square? This would be 5y and 5y. How do you check to see if this is a perfect square trinomial? You multiply 6x squared times 5y, and then you have to multiply it by what? 2. So this would have to be what here? 60. Don't get fooled. You cannot break this down anymore, but you need to check. And that's a good thing. Let me write a different problem up here. Say you had 36x to the fourth minus 60x squared y plus 25y squared. So I go, okay, is there a GCF? You guys say no. 3 terms. If you immediately do this, which some of you will, you'll write down, okay, 36 times 25. As soon as you do that, you should say, I know she's crazy, but I don't think she'd make me multiply 2 two-digit numbers together, then list out all of the factors. Right? Do you guys see that? If you did get to this point, you should be like, wait a second. Let me check to see if it's one of those perfect square things. How do you check that? This would be 6x squared and 6x squared, right? This would be 5y and 5y. How do you know if it's a perfect square trinomial? You take the first part, 6x squared, times the second one, 5y, times what number? 2. What's 6x squared times 5y times 2? 60 x squared y. So is this one, this new problem that I just made up, is this a perfect square trinomial? Yes. So your answer here would be 6x squared, 5y, and what's the sign in the middle? It's negative because the 60 is negative. And then you would write it quantity squared. Some of you want to write the same parenthesis twice. That's fine, but be careful. Some of you will go like this. And then not paying attention, you'll do this. Is this the same thing as this? No. Because when you FOIL that out, what happens to the middle terms? They'll cancel. So just be careful. When you get your answer, write it out. Take a second to just go back and make sure, oh, when I multiply it, I get what I started with. That's very important that you guys pay attention to that. Where? My A term is 6x squared, and my B term is 5y.
Wait, in the parentheses, is that a 6 or B?
This is a 6.
Oh, yeah.
X squared. That's why I don't like it. I don't like A's and B's. All right. We'll do this 2 ways. I just want you to be aware. Is this, as it's written, the difference of perfect squares? Yeah? Okay. So some of you see it right away. You just want to go, okay, this is it. And then my parentheses are going to be 12 plus 7a squared and 12 minus 7a squared. That took us about 3 seconds to do. That's plenty of work. That's perfect. Some of you are like, but you always said to rewrite it. If you want to get in the habit of rewriting it, perfectly fine. Negative 49a to the fourth plus 144. When you rewrite it, guys, what are you now leading with? A negative. So take the negative out, and then now you have the difference of perfect squares again. So it's negative 1. This would be 7a squared plus 12. And this would be 7a squared minus 12. Either way is perfectly fine. Just when you are when it's written not in standard form, it's best to start rewriting everything in standard form. I'm telling you, going forward, once we get out of this review, that's going to be a very helpful tool for you to do. And just remember, when you rewrite it, take out the negative. Okay? All right. It is the same thing. I switched them. So when I switched, this is 7a here, and this is 7a squared, and this is 12 and 12. So when I switched them, I had to then factored out the -1, but it's still the same terms, 7a squared and 12, and you're adding one of them and subtracting the other one. Okay, let's look at this last one. Pay attention to stuff like this, guys. You're going to get problems that look like, oh my God, we never talked about this. Every single thing that's on the quiz we've talked about. What is the first thing you look for when you're factoring? GCF. Is there a letter and or number that I can take out of all three terms? Yes. What number goes in 8, 40, and 50? 2. And what are we leading with, guys? I'm leading with a negative. So what kind of a 2 should I factor out? I'm going to factor out a -2. Remember, when you factor out the -2, it doesn't go anywhere. Write it out in front. Don't just leave it like, oh, look, I divided it out. It has to be in your answer. So we're left with 4x squared minus what? 20xy. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. So 25y squared. Yeah. Okay, so I have three terms. Trinomial. Immediately, you guys are going to want to go, okay, a times c, which is fine. 4 times 25 isn't that huge of a number. You guys could figure this out. But I'm going to go ahead and get in the habit of, is this a perfect square trinomial? Is this going to make my life a little easier if I just try the shortcut? 4x squared is what? 2x and 2x. 25y squared is 5y and 5y. How do I figure out if this is a perfect square trinomial? We're going to multiply 2x times 5y is 10 times 2 is perfect. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So you have -2. My parenthesis is going to be 2x, 5y. What's in the middle? Nope, what's in the middle? A minus sign. And how many of those do I have? 2. Square it or write it twice. Guys, if you have a perfect square trinomial, the sign in the parenthesis is the same. If you have the difference of perfect squares where you don't have that middle term, that's when the signs are different. So when you multiply back out, they cancel. Very important that you guys see that.
Why are we dividing by -2 and not just 2?
Because the problem leads with a negative, and to make your factoring your math easier, you always want to divide out that negative. I do want to, let me write this down. This was a really commonly missed problem on the last assessment we just took. So let's talk about it before you guys get it back and go, how did I get this one? Okay, so it's what I think it was. Yeah. No, this should be cubed. A lot of you got this wrong on the quiz. You told me it was already simplified. What is the first thing we look for? GCF. Is there a letter and or number that goes into 54 and 250? 2. What kind of a 2 should I factor out? So I'm going to take out a -2, guys. When I divide 54 by 2, or -54 divided by -2, what do I get? 27x cubed. And then what is 250 divided by negative? It's 125. Okay, guys, at this point, what do we notice? This is now perfect cubes. All right, a lot of you just said can't go any more after this. So yeah, you took the GCF out, but then you didn't get full credit because this is -2, but what is my A term here? 3x, and then what is my B term? 5. So what does my perfect cube look like? 3x minus 5. It's a minus because that's a minus. And then what? 9x squared. Perfect. You square the first term. Then it's plus 15x. Guys, please quit chatting. And then what's my last one? Plus 25. Remember that last term is always, always, always positive because you're squaring it. So guys, the only thing on this quiz tomorrow is just factoring. GCF, difference of squares, difference in sum of cubes, trinomials where a is 1, trinomials where a is not 1. A is the number in front of x squared. 4 terms we're going to group. You might have to do a combination of things within one question, but you've got to make sure you factor completely. There's 14 questions tomorrow. Yes, ma'am.
For 3x minus 5, wouldn't it be, I know it wouldn't be positive, but I would think that I would use the positive sign in the original question.
No, because once you factor, like right now as this is not the sum or difference of cubes, because this is not a perfect cube and this is not a perfect cube. Once you take that GCF out, then you have perfect cubes. So once you take the GCF out, then you can use the perfect cube. So we use this for the pattern.